Hi guys, welcome back to the shop and welcome to any new viewers. And as always, thank you to anybody who's commented or participated in the videos. Getting that feedback is always great. Now today we're looking at a very unglamorous topic, which is vices and clamps or general work holding in the workshop. It's vices and clamps are sort of the unsung heroes of a workshop. From a safety point of view, they're particularly important that the work is held securely and that a piece of steel doesn't get away from you when you're operating on it with an angle grinder or a saw. And secondly, then, that the quality of the work will improve significantly if the piece of material that you're working on is sort of suitably clamped down and lets you do whatever you need to do on it without moving. From a general work holding point of view, I'll break this into two sections. The first will be bench mounted or static work holding, and then the second will be handheld, which sort of incorporates a huge level of clamps, vices, blocking pliers, etc., etc. So we'll have a look at bench vices first, okay? Now, from the perspective of someone setting up a workshop or a home garage, I'd say that the first port of call would be a bench vise. Obviously, you don't need as heavy a bench vise as this one. This just happened to come with the bench I bought secondhand from a workshop clearance. A piece of old kitchen counter with a vise bolted into it, or you can make up a frame out of 2x4s or whatever. Now, obviously, the heavier the work you're doing, the heavier the vise you'll need. If you're working on metal, obviously, sort of the beefier the better, so to speak. What I would say is keep an eye out for yard sales and clearance sales. You can come across some very, very good old vices. The technology hasn't changed in the last 50 or 60 or 100 years or whatever, so I wouldn't be worried about that. If you do buy one, make sure that the jaws are in reasonably good condition and that it spins in and out relatively easily. Now, when you are buying one of these, if you are mounting it to a piece of kitchen counter, what I'd suggest is that you make up a plate for the bottom of the vise and another one for underneath the counter so that you clamp it onto it. Otherwise, you're just holding it with bolts, and then if you're twisting it or putting pressure on it, those bolts can eat into the wood and loosen off the vise. This one came welded to the table, which isn't a good idea either, because generally speaking, these are made out of cast iron, and cast iron does not react well to sort of that thermal expansion and contraction when it's welded. It has a tendency to crack. From a sort of a vise construction point of view, there are sort of four different types. The cheapest and the most commonly found will be cast iron, which is quite brittle, but cheap. The next one up then I think is ductile or cast steel, which is a little bit better, a little bit more expensive. Beyond that is ductile iron, and at the top end then, which would be very expensive, would be a forged steel vise, or to be elements of it forged. Vices, when they come, you can have a sort of a flat plate on top here sometimes, and that's called an anvil. That's used for straightening things or hammering things on. Some of them also come with a swivel base, so you can turn them clockwise or anti-clockwise. That does introduce a bit of play into it and a sort of a weak point as regards over time. Then that will loosen depending on the use it gets. There are sort of cheaper versions as well, which are sort of screw on to the end of a table or the edge of a bench. They're quite light duty and they won't stand up to sort of any heavy pressure at all. You can also get sort of standalone ones as well. This is sort of a small little machine vise, which theoretically you could bolt down. It doesn't hold much, it wouldn't stand up to much weight, but you can get going for very small money, I suppose. That's the message more than anything. Now, when you are operating a vise and you're, let's say, using or working on material which is sort of softer, is prone to damage, what you can get then is what are called vise jaws, or soft jaws for a vise, that are made out of aluminium, or some of them are made out of plastic, and you could just put them in there, and what they'll do is they'll cushion the clamping force of the vise so you don't scratch the material you're working on. From a very cheap point of view, you could also get a few bits of sacrificial timber or something like that, stick them in there and clamp using that so that you don't scratch your material. So all in all, they're sort of fairly basic in their setup, fairly straightforward. But there's no doubt, but they are a huge advantage inside the workshop. They give you that third hand, which is of great benefit. Now, another method of clamping down work, or sort of doing a very basic work holding technique, would be to use a ratchet strap and a few blocks of timber to clamp down whatever you're working on. Pretty straightforward. You run the strap underneath the bench, you hook it onto itself, and pull tight. And what that'll give you then is a sort of a good strong hold down if you're working on a sheet or something like that. If you are using this to do pipes, what it suggests is that you'd cut a profile of some description into the piece of timber, give yourself a bit of a triangle to hold onto the pipe, and possibly use two straps instead of the one. But anyway, a fairly cheap and accessible way to clamp stuff down onto a bench. Now, one recommendation I'd make is that you'd find something that you could mount outside for doing dirty angle grinder work with, say, rust removal or cutting and stuff like that. It doesn't have to be fancy. This is an old trestle that I got out of a friend's scrap heap. I just welded on a bit of flat bar so I could clamp onto it, and it's great for, getting rid of rust, using polishing wheels, that type of stuff. Keeps all that dirt out of the workshop. What you'll find is, as you progress and buy more tools, you'll be looking to keep them clean. That grinder dust gets into everything, gets into fans on drills, motors, everywhere effectively, and there's a magnetic component to it which doesn't do electronics or electrics any favours. Now, as regards handheld or hand operated clamps, they broadly break into three sections. The first one would be for woodworking, the second would be for metalworking and fabrication, and then the third classification, which I'm going to make here, is magnetic, obviously for metalworking. Now, from a sort of a traditional perspective, you'll have come across some of these before. These are called C clamps or G clamps. Very effective at what they do, but they're not that straightforward to operate when you have sort of work held together and you're trying to close one of these. There's a good bit of turning and twisting to get it there. So they've been sort of largely superseded by the slide type clamps, which I'll show you now. And this would here now would be a slide type. This is called, sometimes they're called F clamps as well. And basically the way it works is that the one jaw slides up and down on this. There's a slight bit of play in that, so that when there's pressure put on it, it locks into teeth here on the inside of the rail. So you'd snug it up to the work, and then you tighten it down then with the hand screw. They're fairly straightforward. They come in a range of sizes, shapes, different sizes of jaws. You can get ones with sort of jaws that go around a piece of work as well. Generally speaking as well, they come with rubberized grips on the ends of the jaws or the clamping faces. If you lose these, it's not the end of the world. You can use a little piece of rubber or a sacrificial piece of wood to stop you marking whatever you're working on. These give a good clamp, fairly strong. They have been largely superseded though by the trigger style clamps, which are these fellas here. Basically the way they work is that you hold your material together and then you just sort of a pump action type thing, similar enough to a silicone gun, and then that clamps in there like that, and there's a little release button on the inside of them there that you press to release it. The more modern ones of these, and they're the better brands, they exert some fairly serious clamping power now at this stage, whereas before they were sort of an item that you'd use to set things up, and then you'd sort of put in a few heavier clamps on top of it. But as they're going now, they're getting pretty good. So keep an eye out for a cheap version of some of these. They're particularly handy to have, even if you're setting up metal. They can clamp it together to allow you to get to the point where you can actually put on a heavier clamp then on top of it. Okay, so that's sort of wood clamps as such. You'll find these little clippy ones easy enough to get as well. Again, they come in a range of sizes and shapes. They're sort of handy if you wanted to hold something on very quickly. Again, easy to operate and easy to use. Now, after we've finished sort of with the wood clamps, we're venturing in then into sort of the metal holding or sort of the heavier fabrication side. The most common clamps you'll come across are these. These are a vice grip brand. and that has become the name of them. Certainly here in Europe anyway, these are called vice grips. I think their correct technical term is the locking pliers, and the way they work is you put them on the material. You can adjust the tension by screwing the thumb screw here at the back, and when they clamp down, then this little locking handle here pops up, and when you want to release them, then you press down on that handle and it opens. If you tighten them very severely, sometimes it's very difficult to get that little handle down. So there is another style of quick release ones, which I'll show you here, which don't have that. They have a little sort of a spring-loaded mechanism inside in the base of the handle there, and they're easier to open and sort of less aggressive to use as such. Now, those vice grips or locking pliers, they come in a range of different sizes, shapes. You can get them with long noses, short noses, wider jaws, sort of narrower jaws, etc., etc. So they're handy to have, but from a work clamping point of view, they're not fantastic because the jaws do not stay parallel as you open them. So there's obviously pressure there then that squeezes stuff out this way, as opposed to other styles of clamps which maintain a parallelism from the jaws. Now, from a welding perspective then, these are called welding clamps or welding pliers. The way they work is similar enough to the vice grips, and in fairness, are these vice grips? No. You can get vice grip branded one of these. Same principle as before. You loosen it off with the thumb screw, clamp it onto the work, and the jaws here on these are either movable like these to maintain parallelism for the jaws, or alternatively, what you can get is sort of a rounded jaw configuration there, which lets you clamp the stuff without it exerting pressure back or forth. Again, they come in a range of sizes and shapes. That's another little version of that one there with the quick release mechanism. This is a vice grip branded one. Again, fierce handy for setting work up and clamping it together. Now, as I said there, those locking pliers come in a range of different flavors. These ones here are for piping. They clamp onto pipe. If you were joining two pieces of pipe or welding pipe, you can clamp it onto both sides of it, and then you can weld down the middle here. That's why the gap is on those ones. Similar enough to those ones. You'll see this configuration as well. This is for sheet metal, for clamping one sheet to another. Fairly straightforward. And then, as I said, you can get sort of long nose ones as well, or needle nose type ones for different operations. So that's the locking plier side of clamps. When we look for sort of heavier duty clamping, then what we're looking at then is sort of similar enough to the F-style clamps for wood, but you'll see a much larger frame on metalworking clamps, and also the thumb screws will be different as well. It won't be one that you'll twist with your hand. There'll be a sort of a handle on it to allow you to exert pressure, and probably the threads will be bigger and heavier on the screw or the lock part. I have two here. This one here is a particular favourite of mine. It's made by a company called Bessie. I think they're a German company. Clamps in onto the work, or you push it in to snug it up to the work, and then the handle at the front then ratchets in to tighten that, and you can exert some serious pressure then. So when I got these, I didn't realise how good they were, but as it turned out, or as experience has taught me, they're a particularly valuable set of clamps to have. From a bigger perspective then, as you can see, the frame on this is way heavier, and the locking mechanism, you can exert a whole lot more pressure down on this as well. So these metalworking clamps, they're quite expensive because of the materials gone into them and the sort of their heavy duty nature. You may or may not need those. Where I find them good is when I'm welding joints together and I don't want welding distortion to push the material apart. Now, last section is magnetic clamps. Again, they come in a different range of sort of sizes, flavors, colors, etc., etc. They broadly break into two sections. One would be switched and the other would be constant or static. The way the switched ones work is that they have an on and off switch on them. Didn't obviously clean these beforehand, but they're not magnetic until you turn on the magnet. However that magic works, I don't know. But when you're putting stuff together, you can shuffle these into the corner, and then when it's in the right place, then you switch on the magnet and it holds down. A sort of an improvement on those then would be these ones here with two magnets, so that you can put it down, lock it on one side, and then as you put your upright or your 90-degree piece in, you can turn on the other magnet as well and hold that. The last one I have here is just a variable angle one, which can open from pretty much anything to anything, and then just locks down then with the thumb screw, again with two magnets for framing up or whatever you want to do. One tip I would give you here as regards cleaning magnets is the best way or the only way of cleaning them properly is with compressed air, especially the static ones which are on all the time. Even in this one here with the magnet switched off, there's always sort of a bit of slag or grinder dust or something stuck in it, and that can throw off your angles if you don't keep them clean. Now, when you are using these, be careful with them, because the last thing you want to do now is hit one of the magnets with your weld bead and you'll destroy your welding magnet, and they can be fairly expensive. Now, just to conclude, what I'd say is I'd certainly recommend any type of clamping system. Anything where you can get the work more secure will lead to a better outcome and a better quality of work. It's also safer. If I had to be asked for a recommendation, I would certainly go with one of these, sort of a quick release welding clamps. I just find myself going to them again and again and again for wood, for metal, for pretty much anything. Beyond that then, if I had to pick, I'd pick these Bessie clamps here, as regards just the pure power that they can exert on holding down material. And I suppose a few magnetic clamps, if you're doing anything in relation to metalwork, of huge benefit to you. I would say as well, don't forget the ratchet strap. They're good at holding material down. They can pull it apart, they can pull it together, etc., etc. So it's a cheap way of getting into work holding. Right, that's about it. So if you have any questions, stick them in the comments down here, and I'll do my best to answer them. And other than that, I'll see you next time.